And welcome back to episode number 28 of Raise the Banner podcast. I'm one of your two regular co-hosts here tonight, Matt Couture, here with Benny Ballgame Dearth. And we're joined by a special guest, Nick Cattles of Nick C Radio. He also is on the podcast with Greg Bernard. Greg, Nick, how you doing today?
I'm doing all right, Matt. I'm doing good, my man.
Good. All right, let's just jump right into it. Obviously, the NFL Combine just kicked off. Just finished up. There was a lot of rises and fallers. Nick, I'm curious your thoughts on what guys really stood out to you. I know obviously we can't really look at the combine and overhype the results in any specific way. But what players specifically jumped out to you from watching the combine over the weekend?
Yeah, I think the guy that jumped out the most to me was A.D. Mitchell. And I saw Texas play a good amount of football this year. Sarkisian, I'm a pretty good gauge of his offense, and I like what he does. And Texas was a lot of fun to watch, especially when Ewers was completely healthy. And I know Mitchell he's a good player, and he's made a lot of big plays, right? In both places he played in college, in big games as well. But man, he tested off the charts. And I thought going into the combine, the Patriots might have a shot at him at 34. Now I think you got to move into the first round if you want that dude, because he was just tremendous. To go along with his production and his game film, what he did at the combine, I don't see any way he gets past 25, 26 in this draft now.
I agree completely. Ben, where are you at with what rises did you see?
So he was my top wide receiver riser. Considering he weighs 40 pounds more than Xavier Worthy, to be just over a tenth of a second slower than him was pretty damn impressive. So for me, I would say, just from what I saw, right? It's and I'm gonna mispronounce the guy's last name. The tackle out of Washington looked as
Fautanu, I think his name.
Yeah, Fautanu, something like that. Yeah, looked as comfortable as could be running those drills on Sunday. He I think, the offensive lineman, I don't really think there's a clear cut top tackle in this draft. I mean, everyone's going to have their preferences. But he was the guy that really stood out, especially, and I forget what the drill is, but you're essentially in a squat position and you're moving laterally and front and back based on how the coach is telling you to move. And he just looked really quick, really comfortable, balanced, somebody who could do that all day. And I thought he kind of really stood out in that regard. For a guy his size to be that comfortable in those positions and that mobile for a tackle is something that teams who want to protect a quarterback are really going to look for. And if he falls, maybe somebody's, pulling the trigger. Maybe they try to move up for him, but, he was already going to be a first round pick, but, maybe he's a guy that flashed enough that he could be a top 10 tackle and maybe possibly the first tackle off the board.
Yeah. I mean, for me, I think big time, and Ben, you know how high I've been on him since day one, but Brian Thomas Jr. Put on a damn show. Weighed in at 209, ran, was it a 4.34? I think that's what he came in at. Just incredibly impressive athlete. He's still pretty raw. I've been battling of if I wanted to put him in my wide receiver 3 spot. I'm sticking with him at 4 at the moment, but his athletic ability, and I've been saying it for weeks now, if you told me, 1 year, 2 years from now that he's the best guy that come from this class, I really wouldn't be shocked. So his combine really jumped into me. But Ben, what you just said kind of a minute ago about actually both of you guys, about guys that are specifically falling into that potential 34 range, and how Mitchell and Fautanu are both seemingly rising ahead of that 34. Do you feel like there are going to be players that are in this middle to late first round that have been early projections early on that were projected to go into the late teens, early 20s, that you think that are dropping their stocks dropping that could fall into that 34 range that you guys like specifically?
Well, I'll jump onto this one. Just to touch on what Benny was saying about Fautanu. The question about him was guard or tackle, right? And his arm length surprised a lot of people. So now that dude looks like a tackle. He looks like he's ready to play tackle with that athleticism. And I'll tell you who to me, Matt, could slide down a little bit after the combine. And this guy's been very polarizing. He's been polarizing since the season, and that's Keon Coleman. And I know people watch him play and they wonder, right? I know a lot of people say, well, he doesn't separate consistently, and his contested catch rate wasn't fantastic. And then he goes to the combine and he runs a 4.6 in the 40, and people are concerned. But then he goes out there and he does the drills, and he looks like a completely different guy. Hitting 20 miles an hour out there as he's catching the football, staying in a straight line. I'm enthralled by Keon Coleman's talent, because at the tippity top of what he can do, his potential is through the roof. But there is, of course, some of that, N'Keal Harry PTSD, big receiver, doesn't separate, contested catch guy. Is he really a contested catch guy? But that's somebody that, many would tell you. I know both Field Yates and Mel Kiper at ESPN are both big on Coleman. That's a guy that some thought could be, late first round, somewhere in the 20s. After that combine, he could fall into the early part of the second round. And I wonder, with the needs that you have, where does Elliott Wolf and company fall on Keon Coleman, and if that could be a guy they'd be interested in?
Yeah, that's actually an impressive, like a very specific name that I agree with. I actually sent, I was talking with Ben about this earlier. I sent him a list. Forget exactly who posted it, but it was a list of receivers drafted in the top 3 rounds of since 2020 that have at least 27.5% of their catch rates were contested catches. Some of these names: JJ Arcega-Whiteside, Alec Pierce, Denzel Mims, David Bell, Nico Collins, N'Keal Harry, Josh Palmer, Terrence Marshall, Quentin Johnston, Traylon Burks.
Yikes.
Brian Edwards.
Nico had a pretty good year.
Yeah, so I look at this name. So Johnny Wilson, who out of Florida State's also on this list, and Jermaine Burton from Alabama. But you look at that list and it tells you, there's maybe, Nico Collins is probably the only one that broke out this year.
Yep.
Josh Palmer's decent, but other than that, I don't see anybody that kind of comes and jumps, hits you in the face and says, I'm a quality wide receiver. So that's something that's really, like you said, his separation is he going to be able to be, is he going to be able to be trusted to go on a route to route, play to play basis, create separation and get open? Or is he going to have to be that guy that they use in specific ways to try to get him open? And in what, at that point, what's worth taking him? You're going to take a guy in the first round that you have to do that?
Yeah, and early on, he's also a guy that, early in the season, he got off to, had an absolute banger early in the year, and you're watching him, and he got off to a fast start, and then there wasn't much to be seen or heard from him after that point. So that's another thing. Benny, what do you think about? Here's another name I got. Ladd McConkey is somebody a lot of people talk about. Undersized guy. You guys in on McConkey, or you out on McConkey?
Yes, 100%.
So I'm a little late to the game on McConkey, only because I didn't watch as much SEC football as I wanted to. And obviously Ladd got hurt. He didn't play a ton this year.
Yep.
But he was a guy who, to me, I wouldn't say he's going to fall, but Ladd was kind of a question mark going into the combine, right? He got hurt. You didn't get a full season's worth of body work. So you're like, okay, we know what the skill set is. We didn't see it for a full season. So are we going to say, well, based on what we know he is he a fringe late first round pick? Or how's he going to run at the combine post injury? Is he going to fall into is he a potential late second, early third round pick? I do like him. I know Ricky Pearsall is regarded as probably the top route runner in the draft. I thought McConkey looked as good as he did running routes. He was crisp in and out of breaks. He's got good footwork, quiet feet. I liked kind of what you saw with those, with the comebacks, where they want to see you really break down, but they don't want to see you slow down. They want, and less foot movement. They want quick in and out. So I like him there.
So not like Tyquan Thornton when he took 6 steps at the top of his road in the game. That's what you're
Correct.
saying. You shouldn't do that.
No,
you talk about the tap dancing Michael Flatley route that he ran, the tippity tappity.
Yeah. Everyone was like, "Oh, Troy Brown deserves to be fired." I was like, I don't think there's any coach that was teaching him to do that.
My God.
Yeah. So McConkey, yes. There's a guy. I'll go away from wide receiver because I think 34, assuming they stay there, right, is a unique spot, and we'll have a pretty good idea of probably what 34 will look like in, call it, 7 to 10 days, right? Legal tampering starts on Monday. They can sign guys starting Wednesday. The top 3 wide receivers in free agency are already unavailable, so it really depends on how aggressively the Pats get with tackle. But a guy that was surprising, and Matt pointed this out to me during the combine, was Jordan Morgan out of Arizona, who big body, moves well, didn't measure very well for a tackle. He was a guy that, in certain mock drafts, seemed to be kind of a trendy pick, right on that like late first round to Green Bay. Obviously, Bakhtiari's gone, so they have a need at that position. And he didn't really measure well there. So if he's open to, now assuming obviously he would have interviewed with teams at the combine, if he's open to the idea of kicking inside and being a guard or a swing tackle, right? Because they still have to figure out on Wenu. Hopefully they re-sign him. So even if they do that, left tackle is still a concern, but he's not a left tackle. So he's a guy that I think if you make a wide receiver splash versus an offense, and not splash, right? But let's say they go out and they get, Calvin Ridley in free agency, and wide receiver becomes less of a need because somebody outbids him and goes and gets Tyron Smith, and now there's really no guy that's a surefire starting left tackle in free agency. If they don't make that move and they need it, offensive line is more important at 34. I could see him being a guy that they would target there because you probably don't have to move up for him given, specifically arm length, how he measured at the combine.
Yeah. Morgan was in Jordan Reed's mock draft yesterday going to the Patriots at 34. So he's an interesting name. A couple tackles. Matt, what do you thought? I think, Kingsley Suamataia from BYU and Oregon. He's another guy that kind of jumped through the TV a little bit at the combine. And Amarius Mims, he seems to be like the mystery man. He's huge, athletic for his size, but started 8 games. So those are a couple of other names if you're looking at tackle that might kind of slide down possibly to 34.
Yeah, I think Mims will end up in the 20s.
Yeah, me too.
Maybe even earlier, just because of, I think, his upside, with his size. I really, at 34, I've kind of shied away from going tackle just because I think after this big teardrop of the top 2 or 3 guys, maybe 4 if you include Mims, I think there's a lot of guys in the very similar ballpark of talent and upside. I like Patrick Paul in the event that they move back from 34 or maybe up from 68. Matt Goncalves from Pittsburgh, he has some experience on both sides of the ball that I like. I specifically, and I mocked it today. I did a full Patriots mock off season, and I had them moving back from 34 and grabbing Worthy in the 40s, and then Goncalves later on. I would like to really see them be aggressive in free agency to address the tackle position. And that starts with Onwenu, getting him back in the door before he hits free agency. Go and give him, as much as he really kind of wants. And then, in my mock, I had them double dipping on a tackle at Jonah Williams and Josh Jones. Is there anyone specifically, Nick, in free agency and maybe even via trade that you have identified as potential left tackle replacements so that they don't have to, I guess they can go into the draft not knowing that tackle isn't like a absolute need in the top 2 rounds?
Well, I think you start with Onwenu, right? And you wonder what he wants. And I've been one of the people, I've been like you guys saying Onwenu's got to return. You got to bring him back. You got to bring him back. And then you hear from Mike Giolito that he wants to play guard. And so if that's where his heart is, and he is set on playing guard, now what do you do? Because if he's set to play guard, you still need 2 tackles. So, tackle-wise, I'm not against the idea of bringing in Tyron Smith from Dallas. I know the injury history. He played 14 games last year, was a second-team All-Pro. I think you'll be able to get him for reasonable money. If you bring him in, you've got to have depth beneath him, whether it's Jermaine Illuminor, who's actually played pretty decently for the Raiders the last couple of years, somebody on the smaller scale money-wise to provide depth there. Jonah Williams is the name that all of us, you just mentioned it, Matt. He's another guy that's been out there. But I think you start with Smith, and then you work your way down to Jonah, and then you start looking at guys like Illuminor.
Yep. Yeah, I mean, I agree. It's obviously a little bit of slim pickings. There's not a lot of tackle options. I'd like to maybe see them explore a name that's kind of come to mind, and he didn't really have a great year, but just because of the Cleveland connection, is maybe Jedrick Willis out of Cleveland is available. Yep. Obviously, we have AVP and Scott Peters, I think is the O-line. Adam Peters is the GM in Washington. Right. Obviously, they have the connection with him. They have Jones now, and I'm having a mind blank who their other tackle is off the top of my head. But maybe he's available.
You've got Conklin, who also might be available. So if he,
that's who it is.
If he's not available, then Jack Conklin might be able to kind of step in. He's still only 29 years old and has that, history with Van Pelt as well.
Yeah, so I mean that's kind of where I've been chasing down the road of I want them to address tackle before the draft, so that if they go and get Drake May or Jaden Daniels, that they have a veteran tackle, not someone that is maybe a second round guy that you're kind of forced into throwing into the mix if he's not ready. Get a veteran guy that you can trust. He doesn't have to be elite. Like, we're not talking about, it has to be a top 10 tackle, but someone that with experience that can be reliable and durable on the field. Something that Trent Brown is, while his peak has been good, he's been far from durable and reliable for the team in the last few years. I would just really like them to address it in free agency, and that's kind of where I want to shift into next is, what is your approach? Free agency is obviously right around the corner. We're now is it less than a week away, I believe, next week?
Yeah, tampering starts on Monday, so we'll start getting deals on Monday morning.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So what's your approach, or preferred approach of what you want them to do in free agency? Is there specific positions you want them to target?
Yeah.
And what's your preference between free agency and the draft?
Benny brought him up earlier. The first guy I'm calling is Calvin Ridley. And I know some people are like, oh, he's not a true number one. Those people need to give me a break, because the Patriots have had one 1,000-yard receiver since like 2017, and it was Edelman. It was Jules going back a few years ago. So, Calvin Ridley put up 1,000-yard season last year after missing almost 2 years of football. And people might say, oh, he's 29. I fight back and push back on that too, because he missed almost 2 years of football. So his legs are younger than 29. To me, I look at him more as a 27, as far as age goes. So I think Calvin Ridley, he brings versatility. He could play inside. He could play outside. He's been highly productive when he's been out there. His 2021 season, or was it 2020? I'm trying to remember. So he played last year. Then it was 22-21. So it was his 2020 season was really good in Atlanta. I mean, he looked like a top 10 bona fide guy at that position. And of course, Matt and Benny, I mean, you look around, right? Mike Evans off the market, Pittman off the market, T. Higgins, you got to give up picks and money to that guy. I don't think you're in a position to do that. So I start at wide receiver and I go gunning for the top guy right now, who's Calvin Ridley. That's the number one dude I would look at. And then we talked about tackle. And then I would probably look at tight end if we're talking offense. Hunter Henry reportedly far apart with the Patriots in contract negotiations. Schultz gets signed last night, 3 years, 36. What does that do to Henry's market? I'm not sure. Noah Fant is a guy I'd look at. Another guy that I'm a fan of, and some people are not as big of a fan, I like Gerald Everett. Every time I watch him, I just like him. His athleticism, his ability to do something after catching the football. I think he'd be a good fit coming from McVay's offense. In that history, I think he'd be a good fit for Alex Van Pelt. So, I'd look Calvin Ridley first, and then I think you start looking at, aside from the offensive line we talked about, I think you look at tight end.
Sounds good, Ben. How about you?
So, I'll kind of start with the hometown guys. I think, obviously Duggar's on the transition tag. Pat's Cap on X said it was wildly unlikely. I forget the exact phrase, but he said highly unlikely. He doesn't think that Duggar is going to get an offer sheet in free agency. And even at 13.8, I don't really know. I mean, that's kind of, that 13, 14 a year, contract is kind of a sweet spot for him. So, I would like to see whether they match an offer, unless a team gets really stupid and they're in the 15, 16 plus a year range. Matching a market value offer on Duggar. We've hammered it. I think you gotta, and maybe even if he wants to play guard, talking to him and be like, look, like, we need you to be open to playing tackle and kind of see what happens. But, Onwenu was a very good talent, great talent. Again, if he's like, no, I only want to play guard, then you figure it out, move on if you need to. I've been a Nuche fan. I think you need some youth on the other side. Obviously, Judon's not getting any younger. There's no guarantee with health. He's been a little banged up since he's been here. Or Jennings. Pick one or the other. But I think that they need some kind of edge presence opposite of Matthew Judon, especially where he's going to be 31, 32 this year, and in the last year of his contract. So, he could either he's an extension candidate, he's a cut candidate if they want to save some room on the cap. Not that they need more cap space. And then, just another wide receiver name I'll throw out there. And Matt, you'll kind of chuckle because I kind of cringed when you threw this name out. It was a week or two ago. Just because of the skill set, I wouldn't necessarily shy away from a guy like a Curtis Samuel type. Isn't going to cost a ton of money. I realize that, the Jags have to figure out Ridley. I mean, Ridley's top of my list, but just to throw out a different name for the sake of conversation, I've always liked the skill set. He's been pretty banged up, unfortunately. Has had trouble staying healthy. And then they do want some kind of an elite starting caliber defensive player in free agency. Yeah. The defense is in really, really good shape. I think, something like corner is a sneaky need for them. There's definitely some question marks. Marcus Jones is not really a corner. He's kind of like a scat player, right? He can return punts. He's a slot corner. Obviously you have Christian Gonzalez, who pre-injury really looked like a rookie of defensive rookie of the year caliber player, but maybe going out and trading for a guy like a L'Jarius Sneed. If the Bears are not, can't figure out a deal with Jalen Johnson, getting another bona fide corner. That and the secondary, I guess, is kind of a sneaky need, to fill some holes. But obviously you got to get the homegrown guys in, and then you got to do something on offense so that it doesn't become drastically a high priority to go offense heavy in the draft.
Yeah, I mean, look, Matt, the question you asked me is pretty difficult, right, to answer because they have roughly 742 needs on this team. So
no specific wrong answer. You could have said any position and we would have been like, yeah, that makes sense.
Like, I agree with Benny on the cornerback thing. I said Tre'Davious White get cut today by Buffalo. I'm like, depending on price, I know he's coming off of a big injury, but, does that make his contract a little bit more reasonable? Can you get him on a pretty good deal, short term, 1 year, put him opposite of Christian Gonzalez and say, hey, look, man, the old Darrelle Revis plan, right? Everybody's doubting you. Come on in, play corner opposite of Gonzo, up your value, and then go back into free agency next year, Tre'Davious. So I think that's somebody that you look at. And as far as the elite defender, Matt, I don't know how you feel, man, but edge, right? I mean, I look at edge. Benny, you mentioned Judon getting up there in years. I wouldn't be shocked if Judon's traded draft weekend. I don't think it's going to happen, but I wouldn't be shocked. His age, he wants more money. He's going to want an extension. Danielle Hunter's a guy I'm looking at. If you want an elite defender, 70-plus pressures last year, a boatload of sacks. Minnesota's got to deal with Justin Jefferson in the quarterback position. He's going to hit it free agency. And I look at somebody like Hunter and I wonder, could Mayo kind of have visions of Judon and Hunter and be licking his chops?
Yeah, I think big picture, they're going to be, and I've been saying this for a while, the Kraft family, Wolf, Mayo, they all have something to prove, especially the Kraft family. They made this decision to let go of Belichick. they have to show that they made the right decision. To kind of go back a little bit on some of you guys' comments, I mean, we're all on pretty much the same page. Big thing on Onwenu, if he wants to play guard, if he plays guard, he's probably throwing money out the window. You're going to get a team that says, we might give you 17, 18, 19 million a year to play tackle. But if you're going to play guard, we're not paying you that. We're not interested in that. So as much as I think he wants to play guard, like if someone's offering you 5 years at, 100 million, just say to play tackle, or 5 years at, 80 million to play guard, $20 million is a lot of money to play tackle instead of guard. So I'm a little wary on those comments and how much they really hold water, because I think the pay will kind of decide what position you really plays.
You do wonder about the agent thing, right? Like we haven't really gotten a good word as to why he just decided to fire his agent pretty much right before the combine, which is, what you shouldn't do 101. And I just wonder, was Onwenu wanting to push the fact that he wants to play guard, and the agent was pushing that he wanted to play tackle because the agent knows he gets more money if he plays tackle. And maybe that's the whole idea, was a philosophical difference. We don't know, but it did kind of make me wonder if that was part of the issue between Onwenu and his agent.
I mean, it absolutely could be. Like you said, I don't think we'll ever really know what the exact reason was behind it. But it'll be interesting to see how it plays out. Obviously, if he wants to play guard, then move on. I don't really have a lot of interest of him returning as a guard. I'd rather spend big elsewhere than overpay for a guard at that spot. To your comments earlier, I agree Ridley has to be the main guy. I mocked his extension today in the article at 4 years, 80. I had a couple people saying, "Oh my God, 20 million a year for Calvin Ridley." Blah 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 blah. I'm like, two things. One, like you mentioned, this team needs talent. Like desperately needs talent. We've lacked it at the wide receiver position for numerous years now. And second of all, $20 million a year for a wide receiver is not what it was even 3 to 4 years ago. I mean, Mike Williams got $20 million a year from the LA Chargers. Amari Cooper's making $20 million the last couple of years. Calvin Ridley on the open market being the top wide receiver, he's going to get around 4 years, maybe even 5 if a team gets desperate. And it will absolutely be in that 18 to 22 range. It will really probably come down with guarantees for him, but he's a guy that's at the top of the market. Nick, what's your thought, and I'll explain my reasoning on this, on the idea of bringing in Patrick Queen? My thought process is two things. One, he's been incredibly durable. He hasn't missed a game all in his entire career. He's obviously a very good player. And second, when we look at the idea of these two new guys, Elliott Wolf and Mayo, making their debut in their positions, while I think they'll be aggressive, I don't think they're going to go so far outside the box and make signings that are risky. I think Patrick Queen's a safe signing, and not to mention Gerard Mayo obviously has a little bit of experience with playing and identifying the linebacker position, and Matt Judon might finally be able to successfully recruit someone into the mix. What are your thoughts on Queen?
Well, the thing that I've been pounding the table for a number of years is more speed on the second level. And I feel like they started to kind of turn the page on that, fortunately, over the last couple of years, that the defense has gotten a little bit quicker, which is nice to see. My hope when they drafted Marte Mapu was that he would be the linebacker. So my first question would be, where are they going to play Mapu? Is he going to be a safety? Is he going to be a linebacker? Is it going to be another hybrid situation like, Duggar / Jabril Peppers, and we're just going to have 45 hybrid guys instead of just one devoted linebacker to get sideline to sideline? Linebacker's interesting, right? Because Bentley, hard hitter, downhill guy, taking a lot of hits, getting a little bit older. Tavai last year of his deal coming up. Judon, as we talked about last year, of his deal coming up. So linebacker could be an interesting need. Do they bring back Mac Wilson, who started to flourish once they put him closer to the line of scrimmage and had him pass rush? I'd be interested in Patrick Queen, dependent on, 3 or 4 other things, because I do think he is that crazy athletic, fly around the field, impact playmaker. But man, if I think Mapu, if I'm Mayo and I'm Covington and I think Mapu can play linebacker, I'm going to give him the shot instead of dumping the money on Queen.
Yeah, I think he is the biggest wild factor. I liked his game coming out of college. I remember when they drafted him, I was kind of like, Jesus Christ, I did not expect this name to come. Um, I think everybody was a little shocked. I had watched a little bit on him, but nobody kind of really expected that pick at the time. I mean, he's an athletic, good size for, like you said, he's kind of a hybrid guy, safety linebacker. The way I kind of played it out in the mock was he was kind of going to get relegated again into like a backup duty. And then if everybody wants to extend Jabril Peppers, I'm in the camp where I feel like they should just let him play out this deal and decide next year if he's worth sticking around. He had a career year. I don't want to pay him off of a career year. And he's going to be, by the time he's due for a contract, he'll be heading into his year 30 season. So I'm not big on that. And then maybe after that, Mapu can jump into the mix. But my thoughts on Queen really just comes down to I think he's a reliable, legit talent.
Yeah.
And this team needs actual talent. They are so depleted of talent on every level. It's just, it's mind blowing.
Let me ask you guys this, Benny. You're Elliot Wolf. And we go off of the Kai Callahan report that you mentioned earlier about them wanting, they're targeting at least, which was interesting part of the story, at least one elite defender. Are you looking edge? Are you looking cornerback? Are you looking free safety? Are you looking linebacker? What are you?
Yes.
What are you looking at?
Yes.
Are you looking at? I know some people say, since you released Lawrence Guy, I don't think you go out and spend the big money on someone like Christian Wilkins because you got the Baltimore extension coming up. But what would you rather do?
So if it was me calling the shots, I look at edge. They've got, like I said, we've talked Judon, but they have to figure out what's the plan, right? Is Judon going to be extended? Obviously he's not going to play there forever. And as it stands right now, there's no edge rusher on we'll call it the left side of the defense. There's no opposite edge rusher, right? And I know the Patriots don't play any kind of conventional. They don't play a conventional 3-4-4-3. It's just they line you up and you're off the edge. You mentioned it earlier. Danielle Hunter's is a name. Edge for me is kind of it. I feel like there's corners out there that you can get in the in that day 2 range. I don't know if he's going to be there, but the kid out of Missouri who lit up the 40 at the combine, he looked pretty decent. Max Melton is an athletic guy that I like, in the 3rd round. So I don't really think the secondary is where I would that's what I wouldn't hang my hat on that. I mean, if you can get a really good package, if you don't have to give up too much to go get a L'Jarius Sneed talent at corner, then maybe. I just think that they're better off, spending the money on a legitimate edge rusher. You take pressure off of Judon on the other side, and then you figure out how to replace him. So for me, it's edge, whether it's a guy who's going to line up on the line or you have an edge rusher, that's that hybrid defensive end, outside linebacker kind of guy. That's really where I would target my money.
It's a good spot. I mean, I think going in like 2 weeks ago, Sneed was my number one. Like if he hit free agency, I was like, throw him the bag and get him across from Gonzo. With him not there, it seems that KC wants a 2nd round pick from what I saw. And Sneed wants $20 million a year. I'm not touching that. I'm not giving up both. We have too many needs to be throwing a draft pick and that type of money at them. Edge-wise, that seems to be kind of the golden free agency where the most options. I just don't know if I see the Patriots dishing up $27 million a year for Burns or for Hunter, or I know I'm missing one more guy on the edge.
Oh, Burns and Allen have been tagged, so they're off, right?
Oh yeah. Burns was tagged, but either way,
Hunter, you're looking at Bryce Huff is another guy from the Jets who's going to be out there. The cheaper look, you could go with a cheaper option, and you can go with a Van Ginkel from Miami. You can throw his name out there, and he might
killer.
Yeah, Patriots killer, but he might cost
Yep.
you around 8 million, 9 million instead of, 25 and still do a pretty decent job. But I think a guy that we can't overlook, Benny brought him up earlier, Anthony Jennings and his ability finally when Bill allowed him to play football, his ability out there, he was fantastic. He was fantastic after the Judon injury. And we also have to remember, Covington's been working with that guy, right? Covington knows Jennings, and Mayo is close to Mac Wilson. And I always say this, relationships matter. So you have to imagine that Mayo and Covington have their list of favorites from that side of the football. And you could see Jennings come back, on a deal that might surprise some people. You could see Mac Wilson come back on a deal that might surprise some people.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I'm a big Jennings guy. Mac Wilson, I think, while I think he has some talent, I think he's pretty easily replaceable. But Jennings is a guy that really emerged in the second half of last year. I mocked him coming back on a 2-year deal. I don't know what his market will be. I mean, I could see him getting anywhere from like 3 to 4 million
Yeah.
to 6 to 8 million. My guess is he's in like the 4-ish range, maybe 5 million with incentives type of thing. But I would absolutely have him back in a second on a two maybe 3-year deal.
Yeah, I wouldn't be against it. I mean,
Yeah.
You bring back Jennings again, just somebody solid right now, and there's so much that is unknown because if Judon is going to get traded, that changes all of the math. If we find
It
out,
makes it a huge need.
yeah, like if we find out on Monday they signed Danielle Hunter and people start bitching about how could you sign Danielle Hunter? You need all the help on offense, and then draft weekend you get a 3rd or 4th round pick for Matthew Judon. Then you go, oh, that's why they signed Danielle Hunter. So we have to see. I know it's not a popular thing to do, on radio, my career and all that stuff. And I've done it for a long time, so I get it. It's not popular to say. You got to see how things unfold. But truly, when you start either, hating or loving a singular move without seeing the rest of, the plan unfold, you might look like a schmuck. So, Hunter might get a big deal from the Patriots. And then, 2 months later, it looks like a stroke of genius when you put the puzzle together.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. Big picture. Good. One thing that, I'm sure you've noticed with the Boston media and fans, but media specifically, is they will find something to complain about with every move.
Hey man,
So
I worked with Adam Jones for a year and a half. So like I love Adam. I love Adam, but I know exactly what you're talking about when
he's
guys are looking at things.
he's one of the top tier guys at doing that. But yeah, no, I agree completely. Just in the sense of this, two things. One, fans need to recognize that this is going to be probably a multi-year fix. Nothing's going to be done overnight. And second, like I mentioned before, this team just needs talent, like actual high quality talent. So whether that comes at edge, whether that comes in at linebacker, safety, corner, or what we need a little bit more on offense at wide receiver, tight end, whatever it is, quarterback, this team needs legit talent. And that's really what it comes down to going into the next season and going into the offseason. Is this Wolf and Mayo needs to add legit playmakers to the team. And that's like kind of the starting point. And after that, when they get those playmakers, then they can work on trying to fill the rest of the roster with complementary and good players.
Yeah, that's why I guess some pushback on Calvin Ridley from some people. I'm like, are you kidding me? Like,
he's a legit talent.
Are you in this? Are you in the spot right now? If you're Elliott Wolf or Gerard Mayo, it'll be like, no, we'll pass on Calvin Ridley. Like he is an immediate upgrade. He is eons beyond anybody you have on this roster currently. Like you are not in that position. Beggars can't be choosers. You can't be sitting there, get all specific on me and go, well, he's never had a 1,700-yard season, Nick. Like, come on. Well, like, let's understand what this team is right now.
He's only worth 18. I'm not paying him 20. Like, let's not nickel and dime a guy that we desperately need. But let's transition and we'll finish up your segment here with the Boston Celtics. Obviously they've gone through a little bit of an eventful week. They were heading into the March schedule with one of the toughest 5-game stretches that they faced all year and that they're probably going to have the rest of the way. They blew out the Mavericks. Kyrie Irving is, I think, an O for his last 10 now in Boston since he decided to
Good.
kick on the logo. They put down the ultimate beatdown on Golden State. And then last night they were looking pretty good. They were up, I think it was 19 points in the fourth quarter against Cleveland.
22.
And they, well, let's just say they shit the bed.
Yeah.
Nick, what are your thoughts
on?
on?
Technical term. It's a technical term, but that's precisely what they did, Matt. Yeah.
What are your thoughts on basically what transpired last night in the fourth quarter? And are you more in the this is just one game, it's whatever, or this is something that's a little bit alarming?
Both. I'm sitting on the fence, and I'll tell you why. The Celtics are a very difficult conversation to have for a lot of people. And we're such in a world of everything is black or white. The Celtics are very gray, and I'll tell you why. Their numbers in the clutch are really good. They've had several games this year that they've closed out. They've had several games where, a team punches them in the face, they punch back, and they end up walking away with the dub, right? We've seen a number of those. It's very similar to Jason Tatum in that conversation about Tatum can't close out a game. He can't close out series. He's not a big game player. I saw Jason Tatum go to Milwaukee a couple of years ago and go bananas, absolute bananas in Game 6 to force the Game 7 that got you to the NBA Finals. I saw Jason Tatum just last postseason posterize the Philadelphia 76ers in a Game 7 and send them home packing. So don't tell me Tatum can't be a clutch player, or don't tell me he doesn't show up in big games. We've seen it. Here's the issue, though. There are a particular set of circumstances that we've seen this team crumble. And we're talking about bigger games, 1 or 2 possessions with 2 minutes to go, and we see it. They get frozen. They get isolated offense. And I can't tell you how many times I've seen Jason Tatum, like he did last night, walk the ball up the floor, waste 10 to 15 seconds for no good reason, and then force an ISO contested jump shot, which he inevitably misses 97% of the time. So that's why it's difficult, Matt. That's why it's difficult, Benny. You can watch this team and you can say they've had the examples of big games. They've shown up. They've shut guys down. Tatum's done great. But inevitably, we tend to, human nature, remember the worst. And so people will look back at the 22 finals. They'll look back at certain games where Tatum, again, does what he did against the Warriors, I think it was, right? Earlier this season, he did the same thing, kind of walk the ball up, take a contested shot, and miss it. And so the people that are concerned or nervous about it, they're justified. Because unfortunately for the Celtics, they're in a spot where if you don't win it all, it doesn't really matter. And Tatum's in that same spot. He's made it to the level now, which I think says a lot about him. You need to be really freaking good to get to the level where Tatum is, which is, hey, man, he's got to win a ring now. So, you got to that level. Until they finish the deal, until it's, Game 7 of the NBA Finals, and they execute to win the championship, people are going to look back and they're going to say, yeah, but they just haven't finished that race yet. So I think it's unpopular to say. I'm just telling you how I feel. I think Tatum has the ability, certainly, to show up in a big game and close a game out and close a series out. We've seen him do it. On the biggest stage, can he do it consistently? And I'm talking about the finals. Can he find that? We'll see. And one more thing I'll say about this is like the Joe Mazzulla stuff. Look, I think Joe's taken a step this year. But again, my guy's got to call a timeout for the love of God at the end of that game. I mean,
when you claim to.
Well, Scal was screaming, and Scal drives me nuts sometimes. But Scal was screaming that he wanted a timeout, but he wanted a timeout late in the process. As soon as I see Tatum walking the ball up the floor, and as soon as he crosses half court, I'm calling a timeout at that point. I've seen this movie before. He's gonna let too much of the clock go. So at a certain point, you've got to feel it and say, no, I want 8 or 9 seconds on this clock. That's what I want. And I can't allow him to trickle the clock down to 4 or 5 seconds. And so I also thought that, and Stu Green did a great job of this on Twitter/X today. There was a moment where Garland kind of looked away during the pick and the switch and all that, and Tatum hesitated, and that hesitation killed him. He had a split second to take advantage of Garland looking away and to take it to the bucket, and he screwed the pooch. He waited too long, and by the time he started to make his move, the defense was set.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a good way to put it. Ben, I know you came into my comments and my messages right after that game talking about it. What were your thoughts on that fourth quarter?
So just to piggyback off of what Nick just said, like the word for me is consistency. Is we've seen Tatum and Brown show up, but also we've seen them wilt and disappear. So, if Tatum wants to be that in the conversation of that elite player, and I'm not talking all-time great, but all-time elite player, he has to consistently have that quote unquote killer mentality that we saw. And again, I'm not saying that he's in this caliber yet, but the killer mentality that you saw with Kobe, the killer mentality you saw with MJ, and for the most part, the killer mentality you see with LeBron. We've seen LeBron kind of fade a little bit in certain situations, right? But the thing for me, and I'm also on the fence, as the great politician would say, it's the answer without actually having an answer. It wasn't necessarily that they lost, right? If this was a back and forth game and they just didn't execute at the end, and it boils down to how they lost.
Yeah.
And when you're up 22 with 9 minutes to go in the game, and you manage to, and not are you only up 22 points, but from 9 minutes to go, you're up 93-71. You lost 105-104, which means that over the last 9 minutes of the game, you scored 11 points. Yeah. And again, and you brought it up, right? Missoula quote unquote wanted that timeout late in the process. They had 19 seconds left. Tatum brings the ball up the court, and Missoula claims he tried to call timeout with 4.5 seconds to go, right? You got to call the timeout. You got to call the play, which I know isn't the modern NBA game anymore, right? But, they're not drawing X's and O's on the board like they used to. But I have a hard time believing that their best play is Jason Tatum with a fall-away contested jump shot on a guy he outweighs by 50 pounds. Like the guy, they got the ISO they wanted. They got the mismatch. He was on a much smaller guy. Like, use your talent, go to the hoop. The style of the shot is kind of what bothered me.
Yeah.
And hopefully this is that slice of humble pie. Like, hey guys, like we, if we want to actually win a title, we've been there. Didn't close the deal 2 years ago. We fell flat on our face early on in last year's Eastern Finals. If we want to win a title, we can't be blowing 22-point leads with 9 minutes to go in the fourth quarter. And our best play can't be a contested fadeaway at the buzzer and then lay on the floor and bitch at the refs because they didn't call a foul in a situation where they're never going to call a foul. Jason Tatum is never going to get a foul call being guarded by a guy who weighs 190 pounds soaking wet out of the shower.
Well, he got the foul call. They took it back, though.
Well, yeah. So, but in most cases, like, it shouldn't have even come to a contested fall-away shot with 1.5 on the clock. Yeah. That needs to be, go strong to the hole. And, they're probably not even going to call a foul. And, maybe they will. Who knows? But there's got to be a better play than a contested fall-away shot with a second and a half on the clock and then complain that the referees don't give you the foul that you thought you deserved.
Yeah, I just want to slide in two quick things off of what Benny just said, Matt. I thought, first of all, the foul situation. Glad you brought up the officiating, because that run for Cleveland started when Tatum started to let the officiating impact his game. And that's when it all kind of started to go downhill. There were 3 or 4 possessions out of 5 or 6 total possessions for the C's offense where Tatum was trying to make a point, and he was almost forcing the action to force the refs to make a call, and he junked himself up, and I thought he junked the team offense up. And as he's doing that, as he's trying to make a point to the officials by, playing bad basketball on that end of the floor, on the other end of the floor, now Cleveland knocks down a couple of threes off of misses, and all of a sudden Wade looks like Steph Curry, and now Cleveland's cooking with momentum. So I thought the officiating it really got in the way of the game, not because of the officials, but because of Tatum's reaction to the officiating. That's where the problems began. And my final point, you brought up Kobe. I think part of this is the fact that Kobe was idolized by Tatum. And I think Tatum grew up wanting to be Kobe, just like Kobe grew up wanting to be MJ. And when you think about both Jordan and you think about Kobe, you think about those kinds of shots, right? Final second, contested shot, tough. Jordan double clutch against Cleveland, against Craig Elo back in the day. And I think, that feeling at times, not all of the time, and Tatum has done a great job playmaking, has been fantastic this year. Nobody's denying that. But there are times, I think, one possession game, end of regulation, end of overtime, even sometimes end of the first half, and he's got the ball in his hands, he kind of reverts to that ISO, I'm going to take the tough fall away, I'm going to take the tough mid-range jump shot, I'm going to pull a Kobe here. And he just has not been able to hit that shot nearly consistent enough to continue to do that.
They win
to justify it. Go ahead, Ben.
Yeah, I was gonna say they win when they move the ball. I think a stat that kind of jumped out at me, and I think I'd be remiss if I didn't mention it, is I think it was the final 2 minutes of the game. Jaylen Brown, his stat sheet was all zeros, no points, no boards, like he had nothing the final 2 minutes of that game. And I'm not saying, obviously, hindsight is 20/20, but they're at their best when they're playing more unselfish basketball, not dribble the ball 20 times up the court, waste 18 seconds and just chuck it up there and hope for the best. And I'm not saying that they had a better shot on that, on that last play. I'd have to go back and look at it and see if they had a better option. Obviously you want the ball in Tatum's hands. He's the best player. You want the ball in his hands when the game matters. But I thought that down the stretch, they played a little bit, maybe too much hero ball. The fact that Jaylen Brown didn't attempt a shot in the final 2 minutes of that game last night, hopefully it's a wake-up call. I don't want to go so far, Matt brought it up. I don't think it's an alarming loss, but if things kind of spiral out of control and they revert back to they can't close out certain situations, that we may look back at this game and go, maybe this is where it really started to kind of unravel and they started to revert back to older ways of not good basketball when it matters.
Yeah, I won't go around in circles of what you guys just mentioned because you guys are pretty spot on. This happens across all sports until you get it done at the biggest level. When things go wrong, even in the regular season, people are going to turn back to, well, you haven't gotten done yet. We see it comparatively. We watch, the Brady the last 2 decades. When every big game, you felt comfortable that Brady was going to get it done because he did it at the highest levels in the years prior. Compared to like the Buffalo Bills going into this year's playoffs. Did anyone have real confidence that the Buffalo Bills were going to go down? Because they've failed in years past. Until Tatum, Brown, and these guys win a championship, when games like this happen, people are going to turn and say, well, it's because of this, and it's going to be emphasized at a larger scale. And like you mentioned, Ben, their best basketball is when they're moving a lot. The reality is they have so much more talent than basically every team in basketball. So if they just play unselfishly, their talent will just push them above 9 out of 10 games as long as they continue to play that type of basketball. So that's where I'll leave it at that. It's just until they get it done, we're going to look at these games and they're going to be emphasized on a scale that the media goes into a frenzy because even when it's really not a big deal, they just blew out 2 pretty good teams and, they laid an egg in the fourth quarter. Generally, it shouldn't be a big deal, but until they get it done, it's going to be emphasized at a higher, capacity. But I know we're a little bit past your time, Nick. So we'll wrap up this. We'll jump into the Sox after you head out. But I wanted to do we do a state your take moment. It could be anything you want, Boston sports related or not. Mine's actually not going to be a sports related one, and I know Ben's going to yell about it. So Nick, we'll start with you.
I'm going to go non-sports, so maybe I'll bother Benny. So I'm a big craft beer guy, and I go to breweries like every weekend with the wife. And we've got to have more breweries that allow dogs. Can I just say it? And I understand like, a lot of people say, oh, it's because of not, food and not. If you got a food truck, don't tell me I can't bring my dog in. It's a brewery. Like, what are we doing? You allow people into the brewery who are not as well behaved as these dogs are. So, like, what? I'm not afraid of the dog getting shit faced or acting a fool, right? So, like, what? And I actually am part owner of a bar down in Virginia Beach. We don't allow dogs because it's a full food establishment. We allow them outside on the deck that we have. But man, we got to do something about this. It's like every weekend brewery shutting me down about taking my dog. I'm like, we can't take the dog. Dog's well behaved. If the dog's not well behaved, just kick me out. What is the big scare about having a dog at the brewery? I don't understand it. So got to step the game up and allow dogs at more breweries.
I absolutely love that one. Ben, how about you?
So I'll be the politician, and I'll do two small ones. One, I'm a big baseball guy, and I think that my beloved Red Sox are going to lose 100 games or more this year. The poor keep getting poorer down on Yawkey Way. So we're in for a rough year. I didn't really expect it was going to be a great year to begin with. I really thought the over-under at 79.5 with a worse team was kind of shocking, considering it's a higher number than it was last year when they had a better roster. And then my other one, which I hope I'm not stealing Matt's thunder, is I think anybody who doesn't like chicken wings is un-American.
I'll be on that. Oh, hold on. Bone-in or boneless?
So boneless is not a wing. That's a tender.
All right. I'm a big boneless guy.
So I love boneless. Don't get me wrong. But to me, if you're going to say I want chicken wings are on the bone. But I mean,
that's a pretty good argument.
It's for me, it's a terminology thing. I mean, I could eat boneless buffalo all day.
Okay. Drum guy?
It's tough.
Don't tell me you're a flats guy.
No, so I prefer the drum. The one thing,
damn right you do.
Is more meat. The one complaint I have is sometimes you get like the fatty end at the end of the drum that you can't chew through. That's the fair. One knock on the drum I don't like is that's every fair. Once in a while you get like that chewy, like fatty, gristly thing at the end. Maybe someday we'll have genetically engineered chickens that don't have fat. That don't have fat at the end of the drum. But yeah, drums over flats.
By the way, I just want to throw this out there because you said you're a baseball guy, Betty.
Yeah.
I just saw this. Buster Only apparently said on the Michael Kay show that Jordan Montgomery's preference is to be in a smaller market. But isn't sure if that opportunity exists. He named Texas and St. Louis. So
Boris came out, was it yesterday, the day before, and said that it's Scott Boris, right? Who really knows what's actually true and what's just words he's spitting out there to drum up interest in his clients. Came out and said that there were four teams he wouldn't name that were calling on his. So it's
four mystery teams.
Yeah, four mystery teams. I mean, again, you can never have enough pitching, right? And you can never have enough pitching. So that's not exactly breaking the door down and setting a trend by saying four teams are interested in arguably the best pitcher left on the market. You can debate that with Blake Snell, but that's a story for another day.
Anyways, I'll do mine real quick. I'm going to do two little small ones. One, I just get this weird sense that the Patriots are going to make a splash via trade. Don't know where it's coming from. Just go between a little bit of whispers that they called about Snead, they called about Hassan Reddick. I think they might make a big splash via trade that will kind of surprise people. And my second one, and I'll be more specific because, yes, you did steal my thunder. Flat chicken wings are the most overrated version of chicken out there. Drums, okay, like those are with a little bit of more meat. They're fun, but like flat chicken wings are just so unbelievably overrated. And I will say, even like I will put boneless above drum as well. Like I will go to town and eat 6 pounds of boneless buffalo chicken, chicken tenders, chicken, whatever you want to call them. But just flat wings are just incredibly overrated.
And blue cheese over ranch. Oh, that's the last thing I'll throw out at the for the wing thing.
They're both.
No, I'm a ranch guy.
I'm a ranch guy, but I mess around with blue cheese if I have to. Depends what's available, but that will do it for Nick tonight. Nick, I appreciate you having on. Like I mentioned, you can find Nick on his account right here at the bottom at Nick C Radio on Twitter. He has his own show at the Nick Cattle Show, and like I said, he's mentioned he's on the pod with Greg Bedard. Anything else you want to say, Nick, before you sign off?
No, you almost called me Greg again for the second time.
Yeah, I
I don't
know.
look like Greg
it's
is much bigger than I am, and I don't mean fat. He's a bigger dude. He's a bigger human. I'm like 5'8". You know, I'm not a big guy. But what do I want to say? I got to go eat. So that's what I'm going to say. I'm going to go have dinner. Thanks for having me on the show, fellas. I appreciate it.
Yeah,
of course. Nick, thanks for coming on.
Pleasure having you on. Have a great night.
See you.
Thanks. All right. Yep, that was Nick. Cattles. Appreciate you coming on, Nick. I forgot to mention JR is a big fan. He's our other co-host. I should have said that to him directly, but yeah, he's a big fan of his, and he was pretty upset that he had to work tonight and couldn't come on. But we're gonna finish up, Ben and I, with the Boston Red Sox. Obviously, Lucas Giolito injury happened, and it just kind of sent the Boston Red Sox into a frenzy. I know you just kind of commented on it a little bit, Ben, but what are your overall thoughts on this Giolito trade, and do you anticipate any capacity of move to, I guess, then make to counteract this?
So moves wise, I can see one of two things happening. One scares me more than the other one, because essentially, and this is in no particular order, but your starting rotation is Brian Bayo, Nick Pivetta, Carter Crawford, Tanner Houck, and Garrett Whitlock. That is probably your starting rotation going into the year. That's the one that scares me. I'll lead with that. I think Whitlock is way better in the bullpen, and I think he's shown that. I know he wants to be a starter. Kind of reminds me of Papelbon back in the day. Came up as a starter, established himself as an elite closer, and the rest is history. I like Whitlock in the pen. I know that they don't need guys in the pen like they do in the rotation, and even before the Giolito injury, they needed guys in the rotation more than they needed guys in the pen. There's been multiple reports out there that said that this makes it less likely that the Red Sox go out and make a legitimate move for a starting pitcher, which is, you'd think it's counterintuitive, and I don't agree with the sentiment, but I understand where they're coming from, right? Team's not going to be very good, and there's always next year in terms of being able to invest in free agent talent. Kind of fits the narrative for what they're looking to do. They want this next crop of young guys to come up and be the core they build around. We've hammered it before. Roman Anthony, Marcelo Mayer, Kyle Teal, Rafaela to a degree, although, gun to my head, I'd say he makes the roster out of camp. So not a guy that you really have to worry about developing in the minors. So, I think that, is it possible that Montgomery, comes down on his price and says, hey, I know you guys need me, I'll take the offer. I'm not going to take it off the table. What I will say is that I don't think what happened to Giolito is going to make the Red Sox go to Scott Boras and say, well, now we need guys, because if you do that, Boras is just going to jack the price through the roof, and he probably has already. He's probably looking at Jordan saying, hey, the Red Sox are going to be desperate for pitching, and we know that we've got them kind of by the short hairs. We can probably get more money out of them if they call us looking, to make a deal. But again, I don't really see them making, and I don't want to say that Jordan Montgomery is a big move, but a big move at this point. I could see a minor move, somebody else available, maybe they trade for somebody, they still want to, there's talk that they still want to shed payroll. Maybe they trade Kenley Jansen for a guy who's on, maybe he's a AAA guy who's on the cusp and maybe he can fight for a spot. It's an unfortunate situation. I think, I don't even think they're going to be playing meaningful games in May. Let alone at the end of the year. We're in for a long year, unfortunately. So for me this year, I'm looking forward to the young guys developing. Tristan Casas, my hope is that he plays legitimate full-time first base. Looking at his numbers, really the only thing that jumps out at you with his righty-lefty splits is his strikeout rate is, is it 10? It's right around 10 or 11, 9, 10, 11% higher versus lefty than it is versus righty. But his on-base OPS, comparable. And shockingly, at least in my opinion, I found this kind of shocking, is his walk rate versus lefties is 18.2%, which would have ranked second in baseball behind, I believe, Juan Soto last year. So walks more against lefties. I think his walk rate against righties is like 12 something percent. But even still, I'd really like to see him get a legitimate full shake righty versus lefty. If you feel like, there's just a really, really bad matchup, that there's a lefty that's coming out of the pen and he just doesn't hit the guy, couldn't hit him if he was throwing 50, then maybe you make a move. But, I would hate to see them platoon him, righty versus lefty right out of the gate.
Yeah, I mean, you obviously jumped into a lot of different things there, but I mean, with the Giolito thing, like it's a little it's unfortunate. I don't. The one thing I was commenting on when I saw it happen was, if anybody like comes out at Breslow getting mad about the injury, I'm just gonna lose it, because like the dude's been the most durable pitcher in baseball for the last like 7 years. So like again, it's just unfortunate. But I mean, the reality is we're in this situation, and I know he's going for a second opinion, but I'm just going to assume at this moment that he's done for the year. And they need to decide. It's kind of interesting because like this forces them to make a decision, not necessarily forces, but it should force them to make the decision of, what are we going to realistically be this year? And that's it. Okay, are we going to counteract this Giolito move, and then we're going to go and ante up to get closer to what Montgomery wants and get him to Boston? Is that going to be the move? Are we going to half-ass it and go get someone like Michael Lorenzen? And like, I mentioned to you, I was talking a little bit with Will Middlebrooks. He's on the Michael Lorenzen trade. Bring him in low money, and you can deal him at the deadline if you need to. But that's kind of the big picture thing that they need to decide right now. And if Breslow goes to Henry and say, okay, this is the price now of Montgomery, maybe it dropped a tiny bit more, whatever it may be, and Henry says, no, I'm not investing anymore in this team, I think Breslow, in terms of what's best for the team in the long run, to do the opposite of what we all want, and they should sell off now. I don't want to play the waiting game of, let's get into June and July and then trade Kenley Jansen, because what happens if he gets hurt? Then you're stuck with absolutely nothing. So while you could get, an 8 out of 10 prospect maybe at the deadline, and now you can only get a 6.5 out of 10, don't take chances. Take the 6.5 out of 10 return, if that's what it means, and send him. Do what's best by Kenley Jansen. And a couple of my buddies on X with the hashtag free Kenley, do what's best by him and send him to a contender, maybe back to LA with the Dodgers, and compete for a championship. But take your time, take the money now, take the return now, sell off Kenley, look across this roster and say, does this guy have a future with the team? And if he doesn't, consider trading him now. If they're not going to replace Giolito in any realistic capacity, and I don't mean like signing some like Rich Hill, who's in Florida right now with the Red Sox, with not, they're with the broadcast team and on a media version, but like, I don't mean some like another AAA signing. Unless they're going to sign, I'll say Lorenzen is like the floor of like a decent reaction signing to this Giolito news. Never mind, they could have used him before Giolito got hurt. But if they're not going to invest in this team, anymore to get this team to, at least into the point where they're going to be a competitive ball club, maybe they can get into the 80s and make some noise and maybe make a deal at the deadline, depending on where they are. Sell off now. Sell off Jansen now. Sell off Martin now. Like, go through this roster top to bottom. I mean, obviously, we got a lot of young guys, so a lot of these guys aren't going to get dealt. But, like, consider selling high on Jarren Duran. Can sell high on Kenley Jansen. Sell high on Chris Martin. Unload the farm, and if you're just really looking to play for 2025, then actually play for 2025. So like that's where I'm getting very frustrated right now is ownership just like doesn't give a shit. I don't want to half-ass another season. what's the point of half-assing another season? There's none.
Right.
So either just suck and acknowledge you're going to suck and say, we're prepping everything for 2025, which, side note, that seemed to be the plan of Chaim Bloom, was he was prepping everything for this offseason, reset the tax, have the guys about to be ready. Casas is here, Bello's here, Raphael is here. Now we're pushing it to 2025. We're all pissed, but like they need to make a decision one way or another. If they sign Montgomery tonight, 5 minutes from now, like they're a better team than they were 5 days ago. Like, and while we lost Giolito, they're at least better 5 days ago, and they could go sign Montgomery and Giolito and Lorenzen and still be below the tax. Like if they went on, like how would you feel if they went out and signed Montgomery for, let's say, 22, Lorenzen for 8, that's 30, and they sell off Jansen and save maybe 12 to 14. They're still under the tax, but they sell off Jansen and they move, let's just say Martin to the closer role and Whitlock to the setup role, all that. Like, I feel like we would be in a better spot. We would feel better about this team to the point where they can actually be a decent team.
Yeah, I mean, they would certainly be a lot more competitive. I think, that would certainly allow fans to watch a competitive product, on TV and on the field. I don't think, given what they've done, I don't think that they, they meaning the fans. I don't think, given what the Red Sox are as a team, I don't believe the fans really thought this was going to be much of a year. Or at least they don't anymore, right? Last year, they kind of faded at the end. But if they, had kept together the team from last year within reason, right? With a couple of the things that break their way, they could be a, mid 80s win team. Now, I don't think what got you in the playoffs in the American League last year? It was 86 wins, 87 wins, something like that.
Something like that, yeah.
I know,
which is usually the ballpark each year.
Yeah, and I know like it's the National League, but the D-backs got in with 84 wins and made it to the World Series, right? So if you get, especially in such a bigger playoff now, if you get hot at the end of the year, anything can happen. More so than I think it has been in the past. Even if you were
certainly.
Even if you were, if you were a hot team when I'm trying to think, when did they expand to 5 teams? 2014, it was like 10 years ago when they implemented the wild card plan. Like even then, it was still harder because anything can happen over one game. You could be super hot, but that one game, something bad could happen, and now you're out. Where now it's a quick 3-game series in order to get to the division series, and so if you can get 84, 85, 88 wins, anything can happen, right? They could have been that team with a couple of tweaks off of last year's roster
very easily.
And then you go into next year and, hopefully again, everything pans out. They got, those 3 guys you mentioned earlier take that step, and now you can be a, 90, 91 win team, and maybe you can surprise some people, make a run to the ALCS or, get lucky, get to the World Series. And then you've got guys who have big game experience going into their, their second full season where, and by the time 2025 and 2026 rolls around, the luxury tax is going to be in the mid 200s, if not higher. So
yeah, it's already 237.
Yeah. So you figure 2 years from now, it's going to be in the neighborhood of 250, plus or minus. So, at this point, they're obviously not there, so, but if you added those pieces, if you came up a little bit on Montgomery, you signed Michael Lorenzen, you make a couple of moves, then you could at least have a halfway decent team that people would at least be willing to pay money to go see at Fenway every once in a while.
Yeah, I mean, I made the joke, and I get it. It's not really a joke; it's the truth. But it went a little bit on on X that the Boston Red Sox could sign Jordan Montgomery, Blake Snell, and JD Martinez, probably the 3 best free agents available left. All very quality players. And they still wouldn't be in the goddamn ballpark, not even in the stratosphere of where the New York Yankees, your arch rival, are in commitment and money spent on this team to win. And I'm not sitting here saying like John Henry needs to be spending $300 million on this roster.
No,
but they're in like the 205, 210 range right now, something like that.
Is it even that high?
I think after like the Hendricks signing, it might have trickled up a little bit more. I don't know. I'd have to check exactly on Sox payroll on Twitter, but they could go and sign these guys and still be below the tax. Like I said, Montgomery and Lorenzen, like you could sign these guys and still be below the tax and not be paying the tax, and that's what's just like unbelievably frustrating with this team and ownership. Is like they
So
don't even have to blow through the tax to
right.
get to that point of where they're at least a decent, serviceable, respectable baseball team.
So according to Spotrac, the Red Sox current payroll is at $160 million.
That's
Which
but that doesn't.
Which I don't think is correct. It sounds awfully low. Let me just see if I go into the team.
I can see right here. Hold on, I'll pull up Red Sox payroll.
Let's see,
actual
2024
account.
active payroll. Yeah, it says adjusted luxury tax salary is 170 million.
No, they're up over 200. I can pull up. Hold on. His Sox payroll's Google Docs. They're at 205 and 205.7 million. So the luxury tax is 37. So that's 237. So that's 22 below. Like I mentioned, they could sign Montgomery for that 22-23 range very easily. Oh, excuse me, they're 32 below. They could sign Montgomery and Lorenzen and still be below the tax. Like not even have to get rid of Kenley, but then they could turn and get send Kenley out and save more money and be back down around like the 220 range, 215 range, which is below what they were last year. And again, we would all be looking at this team and saying like there'll at least be like a decent team. And don't get me wrong, like I there's a lot of Rafaela's game that I like. I'm a believer that Yoshida is going to take a step this year. I like Vaughn Grissom's bat. Tyler O'Neill could have a breakout a season, if he can stay healthy, a pretty good season. I am a huge Wilyer Abreu fan. I think his bat is very underrated heading into the season. I'm a believer in Andrew Bailey and Craig Breslow's pitching program. So, like, could this team come out and surprise us? Yes, because I do believe that there is an upside to a lot of players on this team. But, like, at this point, you can't look at this roster and say, this is a playoff roster. And the fact of the matter that they could get into that conversation of being a significantly better team without going over the tax, and our ownership group doesn't want to do that while they're going and investing millions and billions in other things. It's a punch in the face to Red Sox fans. And I know we talked about it even before the Giolito signing. We came into the offseason with the need of two starters, like legit starters. Didn't like at least one high quality one, a number two at least, and ideally another top two guy. But we needed two legit starters at the very least. And we're now 3 weeks from the season, and we still need two legit starters. Now, what really, kind of three, but we went, Giolito's down, and that's obviously unfortunate. But it's still kind of in front of them. It's just mind blowing that there's no doubt that Montgomery's price has come down. Like it has to have come down significantly from what it was 2 months ago. There's no way he's not asking 6'1", 62 like it was reported that he was asking. There's no way. I will bet all the money in the world that he signs for at max 4 years, $100 million. Like no more than I don't think he's going to get 5 years, and I don't think he's going to get more than 25 million. So it could be somewhere in that range. I think 4 years, 100 million is probably his max right now. Maybe he signs, a 25, 26 with opt-outs and he's a free agent next year. But the fact of the matter is there's nothing in me anymore that is expecting this Red Sox team to do anything. And it's even more frustrating because it's not even about I can't go and blame Breslow because it's not Breslow. It's John Henry, and there's whispers out there that even Tom Werner and Sam Kennedy are not happy about it. It's John Henry
Right.
that is to
Well,
blame. So when
and
this
what's
team has, like you said, if this team loses 100 games this year, there's one person to turn to and one person to turn to only, and it's John Henry.
so the one thing, and so we talked about this a while ago. First brought up a while ago. We've touched on it a couple times. Is that and this is from Sam Kennedy's mouth. They wanted a lower payroll this year than last year, and last year was what 220 or 225, whatever
25.
the 225. Yep. And we thought, okay, well, what exactly does that mean? What did you say?
They're
Pat's
at 20. They're at 205.7 in the luxury tax 237. So they have $32 million.
So let's just call it 205. Make it a raw number.
Yep.
What's to say that John Henry didn't go to Breslow and say it's a $200 million cap? Like, they may still be over what he wants, right? We don't know, but because this is twofold, right? Because you, on one hand, you have, okay, well, if the payroll budget is a certain number that's higher than where they're currently at, why hasn't Breslow made a move to spend and add, right? Because we still have to. You can't go into the season with you need more than 5 starters, and there's nobody in AAA that, I mean, it's a lost season, so I guess they can call up anybody because who cares at this point. You'd think that he would go find a deal and go sign somebody, to fill a need on the roster, and knowing that he has a certain budget. But if he's already over budget, then you're right. Like, there's nobody to blame except for John Henry, and again, if the budget is higher than 205,
even if it's 210, 215, and like I've heard some whispers, in and out of public Twitter and background talking with people, that I'm taking this is more of a guess and not like a report, but from what I've heard whispers wise is that people think it's 210 million. So at that point, like,
and you're not getting somebody like a Michael Lorenzen for $5 million a year.
Yeah, exactly. So when we talk about, what other notable additions that they could sign, like, I don't know, maybe Adam Duvall, like that's like, but what does Adam Duvall get you? Like, the best piece that you can sign is maybe Duvall, and I think that's pushing it because I think he can get more than that. Or maybe like a Jake Odorizzi or something like that, like a low end depth pitching arm that, like, at that point, just pitch this, sure, you can get one of them because you need arms throughout the season. But like, if it's 210, and that's what I'm taking a guess, there comes, and we know that there's no such thing as an actual, like, rock hard budget in baseball. It could take, John Henry could wake up tomorrow morning and say, fine, spend 230. Like, he has the power to do that.
Right.
So like, maybe
he has the power to wake up tomorrow and decide, I'm 73 years old. Why on earth am I trying to pinch pennies? I'm not going to be the owner for much longer. Here's a $300 million budget. Put a winning roster together. He's not going to, obviously, because we're too late in the game, right? Like, we're legitimately dreaming about that. But you're right. Like, he has the power to wake up and say, this is what I want to spend. This is what I want. This is what I'm okay with my GM spending on this team.
Yeah, and maybe Montgomery, maybe Montgomery's price comes down to 480. Like, in Breslow calls Theo, and Theo calls Cora, and Cora calls someone else, and they trap John Henry in a freaking room and say, like, dude, like, come on.
Yeah, they
start spend the money.
They start trying
at that point. Yeah, maybe at that point
squeeze money out of his eyeballs.
Yeah, maybe at that point Henry says, "Okay, fine." Like, and so, like, because that's like literally the only hope that I'm kind of clinging on to, is the concept of, like, maybe Montgomery's, like, demands get to a range where it's like, dude, like, Henry calls and gets called by everybody, and it's like, dude, come on. Like, this is ridiculous. But I mean, to your point, like, when I brought this up, we've talked about it multiple times. John Henry and Tom Werner in their mid-70s. What are you doing? Like, what are you doing? What? Like, you don't need to set up your children and your legacies for trust fund. They already have all that.
Right.
You have generational that's putting it lightly, generational wealth for generations to come. Your families will be set for life. What are you pushing for in your mid 70s to the point where you're not investing in things that you already have? So that just tells me that he does not care about the Red Sox the way he used to, which then tells me he needs to sell the damn team. And over the last couple of weeks, I've kind of maybe a little bit just like pushing myself to believe. I think there's a scenario 4 to 5 years from now where Theo Epstein becomes I would say the John Henry of this team in terms of sole decision maker, principal owner type of power over the Boston Red Sox.
I don't know if it would take that long, and I would certainly welcome it. I mean, for obvious reasons.
For so many reasons.
And I mean, obviously, his legacy here writes itself. His legacy in baseball writes itself, really. But yeah, I mean, you're right. Like what are they waiting for? They're not brand new owners. They're not 52-year-old guys buying the Red Sox 20 years ago. And obviously the ambitions has changed. They've won four World Series in their tenure, and they've come close other years, right? They were year in and year out. They were always competitive, and they were always there in the end. From
They were
really
spending.
From really 2001, 2002 time, until
2019.
Probably, well, they had some rough years before, prior
Yeah,
to
they had reset years, but like, I mean,
like
2017, 2018, 2019, they were top 3 payrolls in baseball.
Yeah, and they had, right, like they were good from, 02. It wasn't, I don't think it was really, well, even really the late 90s, right before Fenway Sports Group bought them. They made, I believe they made did they make the ALCS in 99? Think it was, or the division series in 99. I know they beat Cleveland. It was the first year Pedro was here. They made it to the playoffs and they won a playoff series. So I think they lost to the Yankees in the ALCS in 99. I'd have to go back and look, but I mean, they were good for 10, 12 years. They had, obviously there's the whole chicken and beer from 2011. 2012 was an abject disaster, which was a shame because the 100th anniversary of Fenway was a joke of a season. You get a flash in the pan in 2013, and then of course they win it in 2018, and so here they are. Like they had a solid run. They've been relatively irrelevant, unfortunately, for the last 4, 5, 6 years. But they just don't have the same passion, the same fire to reverse the curse like they did 20 years ago, and then continue to build a winning team. They've got their money. They clearly have other business ventures in mind that take their attention away from the Red Sox. And it's just a sad reality of where the franchise is at.
Yeah, I mean, that's basically what it comes down to. We can push around the bush and beat around the bush as much as we can in what the issue is, but it comes down to ownership's commitment to win lately. And until they decide that they want to win, like they truly want to win, this team is going to be in for, a more difficult path to being a World Series contender. We can hope that these guys like Mayer and Teal and Anthony and Rafaela and Blease and whatever pan out and are good and they carry us into that next tier without spending big, I guess. But there was whispers that got pushed out there that okay, they're waiting for next season to spend, and then okay, then we'll be spenders. Blah 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 blah. No one's gonna believe it going into next year. If this team sucks and Henry or Tom Werner come out and say, like, all right, like we're going to be back to spend, no one's going to believe it now. You came out and said full throttle, and you did the opposite. You did the back throttle. Yeah. You throttled in literal reverse. You did nothing. You did absolutely nothing that resembles full throttle. So you made the comments of full throttle and then did the complete opposite. So they could come out and what is this, October, November of next year, and say we're going to be full throttle, or he won't say that again, but we're going to be spenders. No one, like, for those month or two until free agency really gets going and signings start to happen, no one's going to believe a word from what they say.
No,
so
they're going to have to actually do it to get the fan base to buy in again.
Exactly. And they're headed, and I want to say attendance was down 9% last year from what it was the previous year, and it was down even like 12% from what it was in like 18 and 19. And the average attendance was like 30,000 last year, and the max capacity is like 35. They're going to see, probably, if they don't add like a Montgomery, they're going to see an average attendance probably below 28,000 people this year. I would maybe make that my stake your take, that the Boston Red Sox will see an average attendance of below 28,000 this year.
Yeah.
They're going to be in big trouble.
I think it might be even lower. I think as it's currently constructed, I think they'll be lucky if they sell half the seats.
If they're out by mid-June, mid-July, like if they're looking like shit and the sellers, I mean, August, September will be a disaster.
I mean, they're selling tickets at Costco, for God's sakes.
Yeah. But hey, we'll finish it up there. We're at the 90-minute mark. Thank you guys all for tuning in. Like I mentioned, thank you, Nick Cattles, for joining us. It looks like we had a lot of viewers today from what I noticed, but we'll be back next week. Hopefully JR can join us. I know he was a little bit upset that he had to miss this pod, but until next week, we'll raise the banner and we'll be back. Thanks for listening.
Have a great night.